Order, order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Thursday, the 12th of March 2026. The Access to Work scheme is demand-led grant to help people obtain or stay in work if they have a physical or medical health condition or a disability. It is administered by the Department for Work and Pensions, DWP, and support for individuals is usually approved for 3 years with a maximum total annual funding of £69,260 per individual. Both the demand and spend for this scheme has doubled since 2018-19, with the total number of applications reaching more than 157,000 in 24/5, with a spend of 321 million. Concerns have been raised over the increase in the number of outstanding applications and payments and the time taken to process applications. So today we will be looking to challenge the DWP on this issue and examine the impact of these delays and backlogs, which have trebled in the last 3 years, causing hardship to some applicants and some small employers and charities. We will also be scrutinising whether DWP's administration of the scheme is aligned with the policy intent, exploring whether the scheme provides value for money, as well as DWP's plan for reforming access to the work scheme. So I'd like to warmly thank all of those who have taken time to submit their evidence this which has been a large number. And while we've been unable to publish all of these submissions, they have been very useful to the committee and helped inform our questioning today, for which we are very grateful. Now, I'd like the witnesses to introduce themselves. Sir Peter, you're very welcome to the committee. You are the Permanent Secretary. Would you just like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. I'm Peter Schofield, Permanent Secretary at DWP, and I'm joined by colleagues alongside.
Yeah, we will come to them in a minute, but I just have a word to say. I want to thank Sir Peter very sincerely for his dedication and hard work over the 8 years in this role. We think this will be the last time you appear before this committee, so it is appropriate that I pay tribute to you. You've always treated this committee with the utmost courtesy and respect, and we wish you the very best in your future endeavours.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you so much. Yeah. I have to say, enjoy is not necessarily the word I always use, but I've always felt this committee has treated the issues that we deal with in DWP with great responsibility and courtesy and care. The topic we're about to talk about is, of course, absolutely in that category as well. And your challenge has been fair, often gets right to the heart of the point, but holds us to account in a way that I think makes a real difference to the people we serve. So thank you for your kind words.
And that's exactly how this committee and departments and their permanent secretaries should work. So thank you very much for those remarks. Neil, you're a regular flyer at this committee. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, plenty of previous offences here. I'm Neil Couling. I'm the Director General for DWP Services and Fraud. Access to Work is within my group within the department.
And Dr. Helga Swidenbank, you're also a regular attender of this committee. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, Chair. My name is Helga Swidenbank, and I am the Director for Accessibility, Disability and Disputes, and Access to Work falls within my operational delivery area.
Thank you very much. And finally, but no means least, Bill Thorpe, please.
Hi everyone, Bill Thorpe. I'm the Policy Director at DWP for Working Age and Child Disability Benefits, and that includes the Policy Lead for Access to Work.
So I think this is your first time appearance at the committee. As Sir Peter has said, I'm sure you won't necessarily find the experience enjoyable, but I hope you find it beneficial. So great to welcome you. We now move on to the questioning, please, and we start today's hearing with a question from Chris, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Sir Peter, if I can quote from the NEO report, paragraph 14, the average time taken by DWP to process applications more than doubled from 28 working days in 21-22 to 66 working days in 24-25 and has continued to increase. By November 2025, the average time taken was 109 days compared with DWP's target of 25 days. Sir Peter, when do you expect to get the backlog of applications down to an acceptable level?
Thank you, Mr. Kane. I mean, I start with where the Chair started in terms of Access to Work being a demand-led grant scheme that's intended to provide the support to customers who are looking to work or who are in work to top up the reasonable adjustments that their employer might have made. And in figure 1 of the report, you'll see the process that we run through to assess customers for those access to work claims. And I'm sure we'll get into the detail of what it means to process the backlogs and go through those applications. I did want to put it into a wider context as well, in the sense that work really matters, and access to work plays a massively important role in helping people not just get into work from a fiscal and economic point of view, but also the difference that work makes. And we know this. And I see this when I travel around the country and meet customers and colleagues and see the difference that getting into work can make, not just to their economic position, but also to their well-being, their sense of self-worth, their sense of confidence and their sense of purpose. So we want access to work to be a success within a wider context of the things that we're doing to help people into work and help people to stay in work, particularly people with health conditions and disabilities. Now, the challenge that access to work has faced is one around and it comes out really well, I think, in the NEA report, as you started to draw out, Mr. Kane, the fact that the world of work has changed so significantly since the pandemic. So access to work has been with us for around 30 years or so. And for much of that time, it's had a pretty stable client base, pretty stable volumes. But what we've seen since the pandemic is a doubling in claims, and you see that in figure 1, as you pointed out. But it's not just more claims, and we've doubled the number of people working on casework commensurate with that. But it's not just more claims, it's also a greater complexity of claims. And you'll see that in figure 4. Figure 3 has applications have doubled. Figure 4 has what we're seeing in terms of the complexity of cases, with more people with mental health cases, situations, more people with neurodiversity. So what we're seeing is a real change in not only the volumes, the growth in the number of applications, but also the complexity. And it goes back to where the chair started. This is a grant scheme tailored to the individual. And as figure 1 says, we have to go through that with a great deal of care to make sure that we're tailoring the support to the needs of the individual. And as the complexity of those situations changes, as the nature of work changes and the nature of disability changes, so that whole process becomes much more difficult and more complex. And the reason why we've seen a backlog is because simply doubling the number of people working on access to work hasn't been enough. What we've seen is, as we focused on throughput, so we've seen a loss of consistency in decision making. And so our process for addressing the backlog, so it gets to the heart of your question, Mr. Kane, which is what are we doing? Well, we've doubled the number of case workers. That's not enough. Key thing for us is to introduce greater consistency in decision making. So we've trained our colleagues to be able to particularly assess whether employers are doing their bit to do the reasonable adjustments that they should be expected to do, to make sure that we're consistently applying the principles of access to work in the way that we assess application for support workers. And then alongside that, once we've done that and got that consistency back, then we're going to have a further increase in the number of caseworkers on access to work. We're going to recruit a further few hundred into the team, and we're going to drive productivity as well. And all of that together will start to slow the growth in the applications backlog. We've already removed the first backlog, which is the payments backlog. That's now gone. And as we make the changes to consistency in decision making, as we make the changes in terms of increasing the staff complement yet again, and as we increase productivity, so we'll see the applications backlog start to turn and start to improve. And we can talk a bit more, I'm sure, around what we're doing in terms of driving productivity in the system and greater consistency as we go through.
We will come on to that.
Paragraph 18 of the report, Sir Peter, DWP told us it's currently seeking to manage the backlog of applications within the budget for the scheme, but this means it does not expect the backlog to fall significantly in the short term. It noted that it needs to balance the demand for access to work with its other priorities and commitments. Maybe you can talk a little bit as to why you've not prioritised further reducing the backlog within that bigger scheme.
Yeah, I'll talk a bit about, it's a good question about prioritisation. So we prioritise first and foremost those customers who are waiting for, who have a job offer and who are waiting to work, and should be ready to start work in the next 4 weeks. So those go to the front of the queue, and that is the key prioritisation. It represents, I think, around about 10% of applications. So you see, many of the applications are people who are already in work. But those applications of people who are ready to start work and have a job application, we prioritise those. And if you turn to figure 10 in the NAO report, which is in part 3, I think it is. It's on page 32. Yeah, so Mr. Kane, if you look at that, you'll see the effect of the prioritisation. So you see at the top, 40% of applications are cleared in fewer than 40 working days, and of those, 55,706 cleared within the first 19 days. So that gives you a sense, although these cases are complex to progress, the ones we prioritise are the ones which are really time critical, because the application is crucial for someone's job application and their ability to start work. So that's the key part about prioritisation. The second thing about prioritisation is prioritising consistent decision making. And I think that really, really matters from the point of view of making sure within the budget that we've got that we are funding within the context of the principles of the scheme. So the principles of the scheme are set out in paragraph 1.4. And we have to make sure that we are using the budget that we've got in a way that's consistent with that. And you'll see where we, in 2023, with a rather less sophisticated approach to trying to tackle the backlog, we drove throughput at the expense of consistency of decision making. What you therefore saw is that some of the decisions were probably not the right decisions consistent with the principles. And one example of that, I think you see in figure 7, is the way that spending on job aids just went dramatically up tenfold in just a few years. A real sense that we weren't getting the right decisions on that. So the second thing we've prioritised is consistency in decision making. The third thing to prioritise is, of course, around increasing the number of people in the team. And I would say that hasn't been enough on its own. But we are trying to make sure that as we grow the team, so we also increase productivity. And one of the things we know we need to bring through, and we've got plans to bring through later in the year, is a reform to the IT platform that underpins the whole process. And that will help to provide the opportunity to improve productivity and avoid things like double keying and rekeying and some of the frustrations that the NAO saw, I've seen myself, but the NAO saw when they came to visit our teams not that long ago.
Okay, and now bring that to future gazing to the target. When can we expect the average time taken to process applications to fall to your target of 25 days?
Well, I'm not going to promise, because for two reasons. One is I don't know what's going to happen to volumes, and volumes have doubled. I don't know whether volumes of applications will continue to double. And the second thing is, it is more important for me, other than the priority of people for whom that application is crucial to them starting work, and I want to get that point across. I think it comes across well in figure 10 that we are prioritising those people. But I need to prioritise the right decision as opposed to making the wrong decision more quickly. And I need to get time to work that out. So it's work in progress. My plan is to start to arrest the growth in the backlog over the course of the next few weeks, next few months, as more people come through into the team, and then seek to see it falling over the next 18 months or so, I imagine. But I don't want to be held to account. Maybe it's easy for me to be held to account if this is my last time in front of the committee. But I think I just want to get a sense of the complexity here in terms of unpredictability of demand, and the importance of getting the right decision means that ultimately I can't be fully sure, but my plan would be in the next 18 months to 2 years to get the backlog back down to where it should be.
When you talk about a demand-led programme which can ebb and flow in terms of the numbers, the target is fixed, 25 days. Can you talk to how you look at that target, given, I'm not maybe asking you to tell me what you maybe have internally, but if the numbers treble and the target stays the same, and that is known at the start of the programme can change, how do you approach the value of that target?
Well, it's an interesting one, because access to work is not like a benefit where people are entitled to the benefit and it's funded out of the AMI budget. This is a grant that is funded out of the DEL budget. So I have to budget for this carefully each year. I have to carefully budget with an assessment of demand. As I say, forecasting demand has been difficult in the past, but I do have to make a forecast for demand. I then have to make a forecast for how I'm likely to be able to improve productivity and therefore how many colleagues I need to bring in. But bringing in colleagues to do this work, as I say, it's complex work. It takes about 6 months to train someone to do this work. So there's a lead-in time. And then I need to make sure that the decisions are consistent and of the right quality. So I suppose, as I say, I prioritise the timing when it's crucial to the customer, when the timing is crucial to whether someone is going to get into work and going to be ready for a job. But subject to that, I also prioritise getting the right decision from a budgetary responsibility, from an accounting officer responsibility, and making sure that the money goes to the people who are most likely to benefit from it, consistent with the principles that are set out in paragraph 1.4.
May I add one more thing, Mr. Kane, which is I think 25 days is achievable. Of the 65,000, 66,000 cases we have on the stocks at the moment, a normal head of work is about 10,000 cases. So think of the backlog is actually about 55,000 cases. And if that were cleared, it would be possible to clear access to work applications for that 10,000, which would roll on as, we cleared cases, new applications were made. We get about 2,000, 1,500 applications a week. So I think it is possible to hit that target. It's the backlog at the moment that is stopping that. There's also some quirks in the data which are probably worth being aware of, in that if during the course of an application, which is taking a bit longer at the moment as the report sets out, you have a change of circumstance, that adds to the clearance time for the overall claim. So even though we may have assessed the initial application and put that into payment, if a customer reports a change of circumstance to us, that, in the way in which our data records things, suggests that the time taken is taking even longer.
I get that you've got a justification as to why you're missing the target. I accept that justification exists given the numbers. But I'm saying, given that the programme can ebb and flow in its numbers, when you put a target of 25 days, that is both an internal target to help you manage internal process and expectation, but it's an external factor as well, which allows people who are applying for it to get a sense of when they should be expected to see something. And then, as you're sitting at an average of 109 days compared to 25, the target itself seems bordering on pointless as a measure at the moment. If you were sitting at 28 and a target of 25, I can see it, but the disparity between 109, which is the current average, and the 25 target means the target itself seems to be causing problems both for you, for us, and also for people who are applying.
You're right, our customers need to know what to expect when they apply, and the backlog is a problem in that respect. But the reason why we're confident that once we see it elsewhere in other things that we do across the operational delivery of the department, when you've got a big backlog, then by the time you get through getting through each of the cases takes longer, because by the time you get to the case, the situation may have changed, or you may be finding that people quite understandably are phoning you up chasing progress, and the person managing the case is answering the phone instead of processing cases. So you need to get ahead of the backlog. And the plan we've got is one that will help us to get ahead of the backlog. Once you've got ahead of the backlog, then it's much easier to manage the cases coming in real time, because the process is streamlined and you don't have the things I've just described affecting you. So we've seen that across the board in other aspects of service delivery. And this committee had me in over a few months ago talking about wider customer service. You'll have seen some of the areas where we'd had backlogs in the past. We've addressed the backlogs, and we're now down to where we want to be in terms of the end-to-end service delivery. But as I say, I just want to emphasise that those people who are making a claim for access to work and they're about to start a job, we prioritise those, and we're doing those quickly within around about 25 days or so in normal circumstances.
I suppose the last comment before I hand back to the chair is, when you say you're confident you can get to the 25-day target, but you can't tell us when, and you're not prepared to put a figure on it, which I understand why you have that, it doesn't give us the confidence that we need to know that this target is being met and you're moving towards that. So I would maybe offer as an observation that this 25 days if it should be 40, if that's what it realistically is, giving us a realistic sense of what the target is, would be helpful as well. But I am left dissatisfied with the fact that in one sense you're saying it's achievable, but you're also saying you're not sure when you can do it. Perhaps after that is a comment, not a question, but I will let you come back if you want to say anything.
Yes, I understand why you're saying that, Mr. Kane. I think the thing I would want to give you confidence in is the rate of progress and the trajectory going down, going forward. And the trajectory is not going down at the moment. That's why this is quite a difficult moment to be trying to reassure you. But the trajectory is turning, and when the trajectory starts to go down, we'll then have a trajectory that shows us when we're going to get down to 25 days. But I think the confidence I want to give you is I think we're doing the right things now. We're not only growing the number of people working on access to work, we're improving the consistency of decision making. We've got plans to improve the productivity of what we're doing. And that should, it's just by way of arithmetic, unless demand continues to grow again, that will inexorably reduce the backlog and get us down to where we need to get to.
And I think, as Peter said, we've cleared up. There were actually two backlogs. It is in the report. There was a payments backlog. These are people already granted access to work who were submitting receipts into us for payments of their grants. We've reduced that was about 28 days in the report. That's now back down to its standard of making payments within 10 days, and we prioritised that. Because these were people who already had awards and had employers expecting costs to be reimbursed, etc., etc. So that's where we went there first. We've also, staffing is now up to, or will be up to by the end of this month, 648. So it was 588 when the National Audit Office came in and completed their report. So you can see work is in hand. But I do get the point you're making that it would be easier if we could say at some point, well, this case will take you this long or that long. It's just the variation in the cases, and because we prioritise those 10% of cases who are actually starting work, it's very hard to give that kind of general assessment at any one point in time how long cases are going to take.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I just want to reinforce Chris's questions. Excellent questions, because I've listened to this exchange. We've always got to be very wary and considerate of those people that are applying for these grants. And it does seem to me, and as I said in my opening remarks, that 109 days, 3 to 4 months, I accept that you prioritise those, you've said that very clearly, that those that have urgent need of them because they want to get a job. But nevertheless, this is causing hardship. It's causing people not to get the jobs they've applied for. It's causing businesses to go out of business because they're not getting the money that they expected, and it's causing hardship to some charities. When do you think you might be able to get the backlog down? And wouldn't it pay you, given what Neil has said, that the backlog is really the problem, not the increase in applications, it's the backlog that's causing the problems? And I accept this your department expenditure limit, the DIL, but wouldn't it pay you to surge the number of people actually dealing with these cases to get rid of the backlog in a relatively quick time so you can get back into normality in processing the new applications?
Yeah, well, let me have a go, and then I'll bring Neil or Helga in. The first thing I'd say is the things you just described, Chair, in terms of the things we're trying to avoid, we're absolutely trying to avoid them. So you talked about what people are missing out on jobs. The reason why we prioritise those people who have a job that they're waiting to move into is to avoid exactly that. You say that businesses are missing out on cash flow. Well, the reason why we've prioritised eliminating the payment backlog is to remove that. So I think I would push gently back on the assertions in your question that these are some of the effects. Now, that's not to say there aren't cases where things have gone wrong, and I'm very happy to kind of look into those individual cases, but by and large our whole approach is to avoid the things that you've just described and to make that a reality.
The thrust of my question, the crux of it, if you like, was wouldn't it be better for everybody if you put a surge of resources into it to actually get rid of this backlog quicker than you could get back to normality?
So that's what we've tried to do in the past, and it's not worked. So you've seen we've doubled the resource already. We're seeking to grow it further. But these are really difficult decisions. as figure one says, this isn't just like sort of assessing someone for a benefit claim, checking, entitlement on 3 criteria or whatever. You have to look into the claim in great detail. You have to understand the nature of the disability, and you have to understand the nature of the work environment that they're operating within. And that often requires great skill, sometimes requires proper assessment, external assessment, often requires a lot of conversation back and forth. So in that end-to-end journey, the customer will often have regular contacts with a case manager who's asking for more information to get more detail so they can make the claim. And of course, crucially, pushing back on the employer to make sure that the employer is doing what the employer should be doing. And many employers are not, haven't done sufficient. So the danger of surging it is you put people who are less experienced and less enabled, or you try and make decisions too quickly without looking at all the evidence. And that's what we saw when claims went up and expenditure went up on things like jobs aids, which when we've looked at them again now with a consistent decision-making hat on, they were the wrong decision. And what you then end up with is situations where someone comes to the end of their 3-year grant entitlement, and they come up for renewal, and they've we would say been awarded a grant that was the wrong grant if you applied the rules consistently. So when we've started applying them consistently, people say, well, what's happened? Nothing's happened to my change of my circumstances, but I'm getting a lower grant award. So that is the danger of surging this. And I've obviously been doing this role for quite some time, and I've been looking at access to work over the years and desperate, for all the reasons I said at the very beginning of because access to work matters so much, desperately trying to see, well, what can we do to drive down the backlog? And the risk is the shortcuts mean that the problem gets worse. That's why we're doing this in this consistent way. So that's why this is a challenge. This is a really, really challenging issue. But this is the heart of the problem that we're solving.
I get all of that, but let's try and get something out of this exchange. Managing expectations. Would it not be possible at the beginning of a person's claim to give them at least an estimate of how long it's likely to take, because that would manage their expectations, it would manage their employer's expectations. If it's going to take 3 months, fine, but they need to know that.
Yeah, that is very fair. I mean, Helga, do you want to say a little bit about what we do and how we do that? That's a very fair challenge.
It is a fair challenge. So when a customer calls our Access to Work helpline, we do have a voice recording which will tell customers how long it was likely to take for a decision to be made. At the moment, we're saying that's 37 weeks. So that information is out there and accessible to customers. On the point about...
Actually, can I just stop you there? Because I hear Blake sort of complaining, and he's quite right to do so. 37 weeks is over 6 months.
That's the longest it will take. So that's what we're advising. That's the longest it may take for some customers. And what's worth noting is that some of our decisions are relatively easy to make, and others are much more complicated.
But the crucial thing is, at the same time, at the point you apply, we also say, please tell us if there's a time-critical element to your application. So particularly, as I said earlier, if you have a job that you're ready to start within 4 weeks, we prioritise those. And if there's some other reason why it needs to be prioritised, we prioritise those. As Neil said earlier, the majority of people on access to work are already in work. And so this is, it's time critical for everyone, but we have to prioritise, and that's a way of managing expectations, but also trying to draw out from the applications at the start who are the ones for whom it is most time critical and we need to focus on.
And I was just going to offer one glimmer of hope. So in the reports, the average time taken was 109 days.
Yes.
It is starting to turn. Now, look, I'm not saying this is acceptable. I'm not saying I'm pleased with this, but I am encouraged that it's now down to 106. So it's starting to turn. And having, over 40 years now worked in a lot of backlog situations and clear number of backlogs out. It's one of the things I've done since Peter appointed me into this role across a number of service lines. Once you start getting some momentum there, the numbers do start to fall. So it's starting to turn to the actions we have taken, but we prioritise those in work or those about to start work, and then the payment backlogs first, because that to us seemed like a logical way to deal with this problem that we had.
I want to bring in Blake. I'll bring in Chris. You've had a good long time.
Okay.
Blake,
Right.
I heard your frustration.
Yeah, no, yes, I just can't imagine the frustration that someone would feel, our constituents would feel, hearing an automated voice message telling them that it could take 37 weeks to have a decision. That's why I was exasperated. But I want to talk about productivity improvements that I know DWP is planning. But first, before I go into that, can we just refer to figure 12 in the NAO report? Once you get there, there's a horizontal blue line which is DWP's target, 2.8 cases completed per day for the caseworkers. And I have a comment here in the NAO report that DWP do not consider the standard 2.8 to be achievable. Would you be able to explain why you don't believe that's achievable before we just move on to the productivity improvements you are planning to implement?
Goes back to the complexity of the caseload that's coming in now. So 2.8 was a standard. If I go back to what I said at the beginning, for many years, I mean, Access to Work was started in 1994. For many years, it was a pretty stable caseload. The conditions coming in terms of the applications were relatively kind of stable from one year to the next. What we've seen, not only is there a doubling of claims, but also a really dramatic change in the nature of the claims that are coming in, the nature of the health conditions that we're talking about. More mental health conditions, more conditions around neurodiversity. And these all require further, I mean, there's not a sort of standard way of looking at what would be required in terms of reasonable adjustments. You've got to think about each of those individually. They could be fluctuating conditions. They could be conditions that impact in particular circumstances in a different way. And obviously the nature of the workplace has changed dramatically as well. So the role, to get this right, to get the right decisions, is a really complex piece of work, and we've got to get it right. And by rushing it, we've made, I would say, the wrong decisions in the past. So the crucial thing, first of all, is to get the decisions right. Now, how do we increase? What have you seen with that line? Well, that line shows productivity going down before it starts to go up.
Yes, and can I just pause you there? So January 25, we seem to sort of see an inflection point. I don't know if this is a long-term trend where we're seeing an improvement in productivity, where you may end up getting closer to your 2.8 target. We can probably argue whether it's the right target and who
Yeah,
sets
we can
it,
come on
etc.
to that. Yeah.
But what happened around January 25, where we've sort of seen this slight improvement?
So what happens? What we were also doing at the same time is significantly increasing the number of colleagues working on Access to Work.
That's not productivity. That's just adding more staff.
No. Well, sorry, I've got to the heart of the question. Yeah. So when you bring in a new member of staff, they're not as productive. And when you bring in a new member of staff and they need to be trained up, the colleagues who are training them up are often the most experienced staff who you have to take off the work. So what we always see is when we build the capacity in a service line, and Access to Work is no different, there's a downward shift in productivity before it goes up. And that's what you see. And that's the sort of trade-off we often have when we recruit. It's the right thing to do long-term to build capacity, but there could be a short-term hit on productivity. So that's what you saw then. And as we recruit again, and Neil can say a bit more about our plans to recruit again going forward, we're likely to see a further dip in productivity. But how do we get around that? You'll see also in the report a lot of the things we've been trying to do to drive increased productivity. So trying to increase standardisation, a standard operating process, some standardisation in some of the decisions we make on things like travel to work costs and support worker costs. And then further on from that, what we can talk about later if you like, as well as our plans to increase, to improve the IT support. So there's a whole host of things. At the moment, we're not at 2.8. We want to do a work study to work out whether, given the change in caseload nature and what it now takes to make an appropriate decision, whether we could get to 2.8. We're going to do a work study to assess that. So we'll wait and see. But we need to drive productivity up clearly because we need to make the most of the colleagues who are coming in to build the capacity.
You mentioned a few things there about driving productivity. Could you just go into a bit more detail about what you're planning and when we should expect to see improvements? I'm particularly interested in the IT actually, because I think there are references in the NAO report to particularly archaic IT systems, and staff having to use multiple systems and copying information over. It sounds crazy to me that those systems still exist. So could you just outline for the committee what your plans are and when you expect to see improvements arising from all of that work?
Can I just add to that?
Yes.
Like a lot of manual, the report brings out a lot of manual process, which does in this day and age seem to be quite archaic.
Oh, it really is, and I've sat alongside colleagues in Harrow as they've had to do that, and it's driven me to say, how do I accelerate the plans that we've got to get this right? I'll get Helga to talk a bit about the standard operating process in a minute. Let me cover off the IT though. So what the NAO found is that you've basically got 3 IT systems. You've got a more modern system for the application to enable customers to do their application online. You've got at the end point the process that we use to assess the receipts that come in to make the payments of the grants that have already been awarded. And that is a more modern system. In the middle, there is this legacy platform that's not been developed in recent years at all, going back to when Access to Work started, which is a case management tool. And and that does not talk effectively to the other 2 systems. So what we will be doing over the summer, we've got to that point in our modernisation programme more broadly, and I'm really keen to drive this now, is to introduce a modern platform for that middle stage, for that case management system. So that comes in, we're saying now in June of this year. That then creates a platform that can connect effectively to the other 2 platforms. That will avoid, as we build the systems from the back of that, we can then introduce a modern case management system that avoids the need for rekeying, and we can build on from that much better data collection that enables us to target our work more effectively. So it's a starting point. The foundations go in June that will enable us to avoid the problems we've seen in the past. But it is the nature of what we've inherited across DWP over the years, many legacy systems, and it's just been taking us time to address each of those. We talked about this in the hearing on customer service a few months ago with Helen Wiley there as well. So there is a programme of work that gets to Access to Work this summer. It's the platform, the foundation, we build from there, and we will in time not see some of those outdated processes that the NAO saw when they visited our teams.
You'll still have 3 separate systems. It's just they'll talk to one another.
They're integrated.
They'll be integrated.
They'll be integrated. Yeah. So they'll work effectively. DWP has many modular systems. What we're basically developing is modular systems that talk to each other. Each one can be modernised without switching off the others. Enables us to do modernisation in parallel and make progress more quickly. We talked a bit about this on the customer service system. But that's only one element, and that's to come. Why doesn't Helga talk about the standard operating process?
Thank you. So standard operating process is probably one of the key planks to helping us address the productivity challenge. Peter's already talked about volumes and complexity. He's talked about staffing levels, and we've just talked about the digital initiatives that we have. So we introduced a new standard operating process late last year in an attempt to, with the intention of ensuring consistency of decision making across all of our decision makers. We are rolling that out office by office. We hope to have that rolled out by the summer of this year. What that will allow us to do is create a consistent platform across all of our decision makers and case managers, and that will then allow us to do the work study that we talked about a moment ago. And that work study will allow us then to understand how long it will actually take and what our aspirations should be in terms of clearing our cases and our backlog. So that's the intention. By the summer, we'll have a consistent level of delivery across all of my teams that will allow a work study to take place, and we'll have much more clarity about what's needed to ensure that we're able to deliver for our customers.
So to summarise, by the summer we should expect to see improvements such that caseworkers are making more decisions per day, and that they're being more consistent in that decision making, so there's fairness in the system.
We will see more consistency,
Yeah.
which will allow us then to do the case study based on that consistency, and that work study will take place in the summer. So when that's completed, we'll have a sense of what our productivity target should be and how we want to resource those.
Okay.
We'll still be faced with the issue, though, and I think it's important the committee clock this, of if I recruit new people into the service for Helga, they will initially have a productivity of 0% or 0.1%. So when you average that out, that will drive the average down for a while. It takes about 6 months to train and then 6 months to become fully proficient. So there'll be a lag, I think, on the productivity numbers themselves if you were to ask a parliamentary question of us, and that coming back, and we come back to you with an answer, probably say something like that. But it is the right thing to do to standardise the processes, make sure the decisions are correct, and then release activity at dealing with the backlog problem that we've got.
Oh, sorry to labour this,
No, of
Chair,
course,
but
please do.
but if there is this lag, then what would the work study be telling you this autumn that would inform us as to expectations around productivity in the near
term? So
term?
we'll do the work study with experienced access to work assessors,
Yeah.
so that we can judge with the new caseload mix, as Peter was saying, it has changed. I mean, in 2018-19, 58% of recipients to access to work had a physical limitation. That's now down to 28% today. This caseload has markedly changed over the last few years. So we need to reassess all of that and work out what is possible. That will then inform what's the correct level of staffing for the scheme once we've cleared the backlog, so that we don't get into a new backlog situation.
Okay, so my final question is, at what point do you think it's reasonable for this committee to look at the work that's going on currently to improve productivity, for us to assess whether you have been successful in improving productivity within the caseworkers in DWP, both from a backlog perspective but also from a business as usual perspective, so that constituents don't pick up the phone, get a voicemail that says you may have to wait 37 weeks. So when can we come back to this and assess productivity improvements?
You can come back to it at the time of your choosing.
No, indeed.
I would
be
suggest.
sensible?
Well,
When would it be sensible?
in a year's time would be a good moment because if you take the different stages, we need to recruit more people. That is a sort of 6-month process. So in 6 months' time, you'll be able to assess, have we built the capability, or the capacity? Where are we in terms of the numbers? In the process of improving the impact of the standard operating process and getting the productivity up, I think you'll see in another 6 months' time after that. So in a year's time, you should hopefully see capacity working at greater productivity. And then 6 months later, hopefully you should see the backlog, easy for me to say, given my position, all but gone. But let's see. But I would have thought, it's very easy for me to say this.
Thank you.
But I think come back to it on a 6-monthly basis, and you should see those stepped improvements bit by bit if we're delivering the plan that we've described this morning.
Okay.
Before I just move on to the next question, Peter, you've heard the committee's frustration about these 37 weeks. I hear that you're bringing in this new system by the end of the summer. Knowing the power of AI to sift information and come up with the answer in seconds, I would have thought if this new programme is designed properly, it should produce a step change in the productivity, and you should, I would have thought, be looking at a much greater target than 2.8 cases per person per day as a result of this new technology.
Can I come on that?
Yeah, Neil should come in. The point I was going to make is that it's all about data. You know this. With AI, it's all about data and data quality, and whether the
information.
Does the data tell you? I'm a big believer in AI. It's a sort of slight skepticism. What we're talking about is individual cases. People can have the same health condition, but it could play out in a completely different way in different work settings. So there's a lot of variables and data that you need to draw together to kind of make a decision. And that's why, I mean, yeah, I think there'll be AI augmentation that could help decision makers make the decision. I mean, I think, helping to sort of sift through the evidence that's there. But the idea that you could press a button and you could just find everything out, I just think it's a real... Oh, sorry, Neil, you should answer that. Sorry.
Very briefly, Neil, we all accept, having said what I've said with AI, it always needs the human judgment to analyse the data that it's producing. I think we've had a discussion on this. We've had a discussion about productivity and backlogs and so on. I think we've got a lot to cover. I think we might just move on. And in moving on, I'm going to ask Amanda Hack to ask the next question. But in doing so, can I extend a very warm welcome to you as a guest from the DWP committee, and also to Steve Darling. You are both very welcome at this committee. Amanda, your question.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey. That was very kind. And thank you for allowing us to join the committee for today. Thank you also for coming along to the panel. I think it's very hard not to be distracted by 37 weeks. I mean, I had my first baby quicker than 37 weeks. I think we don't really appreciate that behind that is a person waiting for their claim, an employer waiting to employ somebody. And that is I think that's a really difficult premise, that it's an individual that sits behind each claim. And there's clear evidence that the backlog is having an impact, whether that's on job security for those with a current open claim, or whether that's employers taking on a new person. And I suppose as in my previous life as an employer that's gone through the access to work process with somebody we employed, it's an unbelievably difficult thing for a brand new employer to start a brand new relationship with a brand new employee, and then have a really difficult start to that opening few weeks of them working with you. So what evidence do you have about the impact of the delays and the backlogs having on those individuals that we're talking about and the employers themselves? Neil,
shall I start? To come in. I mean, I completely get where you're coming from, Ms. Hack, in terms of the heart of the question and the impact that this has. I would give you, there's a sort of numerical kind of answer to your question, which is the figure 10 graphic. Turning back to figure 10, so the situation that you've specifically described, of one where someone is waiting to start employment, they should be covered by that bar on the far left-hand side. So that's, of the total number of applications we're talking about, 55,000 dealt with in the first 19 days. And so we seek to prioritise that. At the further end to the right, the tail of claims that you see to the right, those tend to often be self-employed customers for whom there's a lot of work to be done in terms of assessing the viability of the business plan and getting to the heart of not just the aspect of the disability and how it impacts on the work the person does, but also on the viability of the business and whether this is a business that we should be supporting through access to work. And that's a really skilled job that needs to be done. And I think it's just getting a sense of the different types of claim. When we talk about the sort of average, and we've often talked about this at the select committee as well, don't we? That the average number hides a tail both to the left and to the right. And the thing I would just urge customers to do is, as I say, if there is a time critical aspect to your claim, in the way that when we describe someone who's waiting to start work and they can't start work without the claim coming through, then we identify that at the initial claim process. But also, please get in touch with the teams in Access to Work and see whether we can prioritise them, because we should prioritise those claims where someone is waiting for work and waiting to start for work. So that's the sort of human side. It's difficult because go back to my answers to Mr. Kane in terms of how do you manage this doubling of caseload and this additional complexity of cases and still get the right decisions and avoid people missing out on work. Because at the heart, I said this at the beginning, at the heart of this is about the fact that we recognise that work makes a difference. Work is massively important to people's lives, and we want people to be supported into work, and that's why we are putting so much resource into access to work. But it's trying to address it in a, I suppose I'd use the word segmented way, that we identify where we need to prioritise according to where the cases are most time critical. And hopefully that gives some degree of reassurance to customers who might have got that initial voicemail when they made their original claim, and getting that sense that there are ways to get to the front of the queue if your case is time critical because you're waiting to start work, I think is a really important element to what we need to do to just reassure customers.
I suppose the that voicemail when you are wanting to start a claim and you would like to start work within 28 days. 4 weeks is pretty normal. It's pretty standard. That must be really hard to take, and that is not a great start to that relationship with DWP on an access to work claim. So I'd really sort of plead that you change that opening gambit with a member of the public.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, that is not, well, Helga, you might want to explain where that 37 weeks comes in, but the first thing you do when you make an application is say, and it's on the online thing, are you starting work in the next 28 days? And that then automatically accelerates you to the front of the queue. But do you want to, I mean, how's that expressed?
Yeah, so it's using the telephone isn't the only way to contact DWP Access to Work teams, and that can be done via online. And 99% of our customers do an online application. So as Peter was explaining, there is a box on the online application that identifies when you're about to start work, and if it's within 4 weeks, that will be fast tracked into my teams that deal with people who are new starters. So whilst the voice recording is one way of contacting us, there is another way, and the vast majority of our customers do contact us through the online portal.
We should check, does the voice recording also say if you're starting work in the next 4 weeks? Then okay, then it's a kind of to the front of the queue. Okay, so sorry, that just to give that hopefully that gives some reassurance, Ms. Hack.
The backlog hasn't appeared overnight. It's been coming for some time, and again, as an employer before I came here, the performance wasn't great in previous years. So when was the last time the 25-day target was hit?
I don't think it's been hit since we've seen the doubling in cases. So since COVID. So in terms, the previous Blake was talking about productivity. If we recognise that the 25 days hasn't been hit since COVID, it's been 5 years, then we're only expecting to see improvements by the summer. What work had been done before now to start that improvement? Because I think one of the things that's frustrating, and on the DWP committee, this is something we talked about a lot, is this understanding of the people we're dealing with, and the need to safeguard lots of people with mental health difficulties, and to support them more quickly it has to be something we prioritise. So what are you doing to try and mitigate the impact of delays, considering this has been not something that's appeared overnight, but has been years in the making? Yeah, let me so 2 questions there. One is, how did the backlog emerge? What were we doing over the last 5 years, and what are we doing now? How did the backlog emerge? Well, it emerged because of the doubling of claims and the complexity of the claims. What have we been doing? I can assure you, we have not been sitting back. The first thing we did was we doubled the number of folk working on access to work. We then streamlined the processes, and this is all set out in part 3 of the report. We then sought to introduce more standardisation, but that has proved not to be enough, and that's why we've had to go back and do things in a different way. By focusing on throughput, we were making the wrong decisions, and by not focusing on consistency in decision making, so we didn't actually find ourselves working through the backlog in the way that we needed to. So the things that we would often do when we have a backlog of put more people onto the work and drive capacity has not been sufficient. The next thing we often do is streamline the process. That hasn't been sufficient either. So throughout, from 2023 onwards, and it's listed in the report, a whole load of actions that have worked, that we've tried to do, they haven't worked, because what we haven't done is fundamentally, which is what we've been doing over the last 2 years, fundamentally recognise that the caseload has changed, the complexity has changed, and we needed to go about this in a different way, with different training for our people, with a different operating process, and getting the fundamentals right. That's why I've got confidence today, but it's not to say we haven't been trying. Huge amounts of work and huge amounts of resource have gone into this. I've doubled the budget on access to work over this period as well. So there's been a lot of attention, but we've not done it the right way, because we've not got to the heart of what has actually happened, which I'm not sure we recognised immediately, which is that the caseload had changed. This wasn't just a volume problem. This was a fact that the world of work has changed and the nature of disability has changed. And with many more people with health conditions that relate to mental health and neurodiversity, some of the standards types of support that Access to Work had been used to be providing for the 20 years prior to that weren't applicable anymore. So we needed to get a better assessment of what the nature of the changes of disability had in terms of the need for adjustments in the workplace and the nature of those adjustments that were needed. So it's not an easy story to tell, and I appreciate where you're coming from, and I feel that too. But we needed to get the fundamentals right, and all along prioritising those people which are most time critical, because those people, I say it again, who are waiting to start work in the next 4 weeks get prioritised, and they, as figure 10 shows, get addressed within a matter of days rather than a matter of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Very helpful. Blake Stevenson, please.
Thank you. In response to my earlier questions, you suggested that you will be improving the consistency of decision making through your standard operating procedures. But does it not? Is there not a more fundamental issue, which is how you've gone about designing the scheme? So, looking at the NAO report, DWP has concerns that because it has not designed the scheme in a prescriptive way or defined the rules tightly, awards have not always aligned with policy intent and funding decisions have been inconsistent. So could you help us to understand why the rules of the scheme were not more tightly defined, and whether you've given consideration to that in order to improve consistency going forwards? I don't know who that's to be honest. I don't know, Peter, do you want to start?
Bill might want to come in a minute as well. I mean, the criteria and the boundaries of the scheme, I think, are well set out on page 14 of the report. So what you see, the eligibility criteria, but in particular, the 5 principles of access to work. And those are the ones. So what we were talking about when we were talking about more consistent decision making is not seeking to change those, but actually seeking to apply them. Mm-hmm. And what we felt, and this is something that we identified through management investigation. Actually, put Neil overseeing this whole area a couple of years ago, and it's one of the things that I was identified through management investigation, but also through an internal audit report. Identified that we weren't making, so that we can have a debate about the ongoing policy, but were we actually applying the 5 principles of the scheme appropriately? And we identified that we weren't. And the report sets out in 2 particular areas. One was around employers not doing their responsibilities under the Equalities Act. So expecting DWP to do the reasonable adjustments that would be reasonable for them to pick up. And we can give you examples of big employers who put in applications for access to work for an ergonomic chair, which I would say, no. That is something I expect an employer, certainly that's something I provide my colleagues in DWP. I would expect them to provide that. And likewise, people claiming for jobs, and the support worker plays a massively important role for so many customers. But we were seeing job aids whose role was not to help level the playing field up for customers with disabilities, but more to do a task that would be something that actually an employer would normally take on an additional employer to do. So it was sort of misusing the scheme in a way that was inappropriate. So when I talk about consistency, it's actually getting us back to the principles set out here. And the reason why we weren't there is it goes back to Ms. Hack's question of what were you doing? Well, we were telling people to prioritise throughput. I was like, I want to get this backlog down, but the danger of prioritising throughput at the expense of consistent decision making is that you make the wrong decisions, and that, I think, with hindsight, was the wrong thing to do. It was done, I think, for the right reasons, because we all wanted to get the backlog down, but it had the wrong outcomes in terms of what we saw coming through. And sort of one example of that, figure 7, the spend on jobs aids went up tenfold in the period. Now, I mean, we've seen growth across the board, but nothing tenfold, and it implied that we were not applying the 5 principles of access to work in an effective way. But Bill, do you want to say a bit more about
so the scheme is incredibly personalised, and people really value that. We could make it more prescriptive and say, we are only going to pay for these 50 pieces of equipment. That is it. People would not like that. Last year, in the consultation, we had 30,000 responses on our access to work, on the access to work bit of the Pathways to Work consultation. And the overwhelming response was that we needed to retain a flexible and personal form of support. That means that you need fairly loose guidance because, as Peter has said, you need to understand the person's impairment, the specific job role that person is doing, the thousands of different types of jobs in the economy, what the size of the employer, what would be reasonable for the employer to provide. That's going to change depending on the size of the employer. And that's why the guidance itself is quite loose, and it allows the case manager has a very difficult job to interpret that and make a decision on the kind of balance of probabilities. Does this kind of, is this person eligible for support? And I think it's, we could be more prescriptive. We could have, bands of support and just say this, we're going to have a band of, 0 to £2,000, £5,000 or whatever, and we could run the scheme, much more quickly and more cleanly. But I don't think that would help people, and I don't think it would kind of deliver the outcomes that we're seeing at the moment.
An interesting response, because what I read to you earlier was a DWP concern. So DWP has concerns because it's not designed the scheme in a prescriptive way or defined the rules tightly. Awards have not always been aligned with policy intent. And now you're saying that you deliberately didn't design a scheme that was prescriptive because it necessarily needs to be flexible. So what's the position of DWP? Is it what I'm reading in the NAO report, or do you have a slightly different position today on whether the scheme should be more prescriptive?
No, I think what we're saying is that the scheme has an element of prescription. It's the 5 principles that I've described. They weren't being properly applied, and our concern was that we weren't properly applying those in a consistent way, in the way that we should do, and it created the outcomes that I was describing, particularly around things like employers' reasonable adjustments and things like jobs aids. But it is a legitimate question about how reform should move forward in terms of access to work, and that is what Bill's described as the responses to the Access to Work Green Paper, where we had a number of options there, and one of them was that we should be more prescriptive. It was an option that was put in there just to see what people thought, because in theory, it could be an easier way. We could process the applications more quickly if you just said, well, this is this situation, this is that situation. But the sense coming back, I think I'm fair in saying, Bill, is that people like the fact that it's tailored. They would just like the decision made more quickly. And that is what we are working on. And we haven't got it right up until the current plan, but I'm confident about the current plan being the way to deliver that.
Thank you for clarifying that. My final question, I'm pleased you gave the example of the ergonomic chair being claimed by a large employer. Agree, it would be totally inappropriate for public money to be spent on an ergonomic chair for a large employer. So could you outline what the DWP is doing to stop third parties from inappropriately profiting from the scheme?
Okay, so there are 2 things there. One is asking employers to do more, to do that. And then the second, there's a specific point that came up, which I might get Neil to talk about in a second, that came out in the report around those third-party organisations that have a vested interest in kind of identifying a particular need because they go on and provide the need and make a profit out of that. But Neil might want to talk about that in a second. On the employers, the crucial thing is I'll talk specifically about access to work, but then I just would briefly place it in a wider context because I think this really matters actually. And the crucial thing in access to work is getting into a process where you actually ask the customer what conversation have they had with their employer about the reasonable adjustment, and you follow that up. And it's giving our caseworkers the confidence that research and challenge is a really important part of the process. It's time consuming, it takes time, and it can be really difficult. I mean, I've sat with colleagues and I've seen applications coming from big employers who they literally have an access to work department that their job is in funneling claims to DWP. I mean, at one level I don't mind that if they also have a bigger reasonable adjustments team that are looking at what they can do in their own department under the Equalities Act to do what they should be doing already. And I place that in a wider context, about a wider debate about, I talked at the beginning about the massively important role that work has in terms, not just in terms of the economy, but also in terms of personal well-being and sense of purpose and confidence, and the role of employers in making that a reality. So just to link this conversation, I'll only do it briefly, to Charlie Mayfield's work for the department on Keep Britain Working, where there's a real debate about, well, what are the best employers doing? Because many people who leave work because who are out of work because of a health condition develop their health condition when they were in work. So what can employers do, not just about reasonable adjustments, but also identifying and helping to support people when that first health condition starts to develop? Because often a reasonable adjustment or a type of support, I mean, Charlie's looking at workplace health provision in particular, but how can we make sure that interventions in the workplace can help to avoid people developing health conditions in the future? And Charlie's leading vanguard work with 100 employers and also with 10 mayoral combined authorities, which is working with smaller employers as well, just helping us to understand what best practice is. So reasonable adjustments in the context of access to work, I just want to place that in a wider context, which is what is the role of employers in helping to improve the health of the nation and improve the health of the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final question is, do you have a sense of how much money is being spent through decisions that in an ideal world wouldn't have been made? So as you say, they're case-by-case decisions, and you want your caseworkers to be empowered to make decisions. Within that, there is a risk that a lot of money is being spent on, in this example, ergonomic chairs for a large employer. And I know it's more complicated than that. But how much money is being wasted in error, given all of the issues that we've talked about, with the IT, the flexibility, etc.
So the report has a survey in there of employers or cases that we looked at. The numbers when we looked at them with that consistent decision-making process focused in, how many do we look at those awards and say they were probably inappropriate awards? So there's some statistics in there. I can't remember which page it is, but
it's about, so the independent consultants who looked at this thought that 69% of the funding to employers was correct, and that employers should be meeting about 31% of those costs.
So that gives you a sense of the magnitude we're talking about.
I think figure 7 as well, which we've alluded to before on job aids, that is suggesting, and we know we were making mistakes on cases in 23-24 as we attempted to clear that backlog, as Peter's suggested, in too much of a hurry. And that's probably what some of you are seeing in your post bags, of people who are seeing, they didn't know that we'd made a mistake on their case. So those cases are coming up now for renewal, and they are producing lower awards, and people are saying, why have I got a lower award? Nothing has changed in my life. But we wrongly gave them a job aid, normally for 100% of the time, and we should have given them about 20% of the time, because the job aids are not designed to do the work. They're meant to be to lift the disabled person to the same level of an employee, and there's evidence in the data that rather than access to work being based on the skill level of the task, it's been based on the skill level of the person. So, for example, a job aide should be doing admin tasks, shouldn't actually be doing the work that that person is employed to do. So all of that in that job aid data is suggesting that is money that, some of it will be correct, but some of it will be incorrect. And over the next 3 years, as we work through the cases that were made without the consistency that Peter's been talking about, you will see those awards fall. Not to zero, but to what the scheme actually provides for.
Yeah, if you've got page 27 open, so it's that light blue line. You see this is all spending on support workers of different types, and the line rightly goes up because we're seeing a growth in demand and the demography. But the light blue line, which is job aids, just makes that dramatic tenfold increase, and you would have thought it would be more in line, the gradient of growth would be more in line with the other types of support worker. And obviously what we'll be doing over time with this data, we will then keep up to date, and it'll enable us to understand the impact as we apply consistent decision making to all the different types of applications coming in, and we'll see whether what this tells us in terms of the likely errors that we made in the past.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a break in a minute, but I think Anna Dixon has a supplementary question. Please, Anna.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies to everyone for late arrival. It was really just further to the figures we were looking at there relating to support workers, and particularly to for deaf people, the support of a BSL interpreter. Obviously, that is one of the categories that has increased most in terms of proportionately. And yet, there is feedback coming from the deaf community that they are experiencing reductions in the number of hours that they're able to secure of a BSL interpreter. And in fact, some deaf people are actually having to give up employment altogether. So I wondered if any of the witnesses might just comment on how you are ensuring that people who do need BSL interpretation, basically for the whole of their working week, are being given sufficient funds to secure that support and remain in employment.
Yes, it's an odd one, isn't it? Because if you look at the principles of the scheme, BSL, if that's the sole role, which is what you've described, then that would be something that absolutely helps to that customer level up to where they need to be. If there's in those situations where on renewal there's been a significant reduction in the award, then they go through a second pair of eyes within the team to help us to understand that, and quality control to help us to make sure that the decision has been made, the right decision. I obviously can't comment on any individual cases, so I'd be happy, Ms Dixon, to look at any particular cases that you wanted to draw my attention to. And they can go to a reconsideration as well. Sorry, Neil.
So I was just going to add, so maybe a difference here between the employed and self-employed. So the employed are restricted to a standard working week as a cap on the number of hours that can be provided. The self-employed are not. Some self-employed customers have been putting in very large claims for the number of hours that they're working. Now, we know in general self-employed people do work longer per week than an employed person, but it may be caught up, and the cases you may be seeing could be caught up in that challenge that the teams have been putting into people about the hours they're actually working.
Yeah, that may be the case, because I think one of the examples is a business owner, and obviously if she doesn't get the BSL support, there's other 24 jobs that she's hiring other people that if she has to give up her business. So I think it would be possible to get some examples with R&ID that we could maybe follow up specifically to make sure that the reductions you're making on job aids to the 20% are not inadvertently reducing some of the support to people with BSL where their needs should be at 100%.
That shouldn't be a job aid category, that's a different support worker category, but yes, please do ask them to.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to raise that.
No, thank you, Anna. Well, it's almost half past. Can I thank our witnesses very much for the information they've given us so far. Can I apologise to everybody that we started a little late. We had a lot of business to transact before we started on the formal hearing. So the clock is now almost at 11:30. If we could try and be back by 25 to, because we've still got quite a bit to cover. But again, thank you all. we will now start with questions from my very able deputy, Clive Betts, please.
Right, thanks, Chair. Just going back to pick up the themes from before about support workers and this big increase. I mean, it's an exponential increase if you look, as already referred to, Permanent Secretary Figure 7. Now, whether you or Neil Couling wants to respond. But is this a real difficulty in terms of the scheme and how it operates? That it's not too difficult to look at a physical adaptation and say, is that something the employer should be doing? Isn't it? Is that justified? When you get to support workers, is it a bit more abstract, a bit more difficult to pin down?
I think that's a fair challenge, Mr. Betts. I think it relates to the changing nature of the applications that are coming into the scheme. I mean, support workers can play a really important role. I mean, I was just before coming in reading a case study, someone who'd written in, who had a support worker, and this is someone who has ADHD, and she wrote, or the customer wrote, just writing the client brief has triggered an emotional reaction in me where the questions on the pro forma made my stomach clench, and without my support worker being there, I'd have given up on it. My support worker was able to understand my response, calm me down, tease the information from me in the form of posing questions and eliciting the answers conversationally, and using an AI tool to help construct my responses into the pro forma. And ends up saying she could cry because of the difference that the support workers made to her life. So support workers can play a massively important role. But the challenge is, how do you, and it's particularly in the case of job aids, how do you identify when someone's role as a support worker is to help level up the playing field and help that customer to manage in the workplace, compensating for their health condition or their disability. And it's a grey area sometimes between that role and actually, well, you've got this person around in the workplace, can they do some photocopying, some admin support that in the ordinary way you would have employed someone else to do. And those are different categories. One is an enabling role and the other is a replacement role. And as Neil says, the caps, the payment allowance is different from both. But it is, you can just imagine in a busy office environment, and someone, what exactly is your role? I mean, are you doing this really important support work that was described by this customer in this case study? Or are you doing something that is actually enabling the employer to avoid having to employ an extra person on the taxpayer's expense? And it is difficult. And I mean, support workers have been part of the scheme for many years. And Ms. Hack talked about the BSL support that comes for someone with a hearing impairment, for example. But it's when you come into their role, particularly in kind of mental health and neurodiversity, that it's more difficult, I think, in the area.
Is that the big growth area then, which you're having to tackle?
Yes.
Yep.
It is. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of data about that in the report that sets out. I mean, the report quite rightly challenges us in terms of having greater breakdown in terms of the type of mental health condition, and also more identification of neurodiversity within that. But absolutely, that has been the area of most growth, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm maybe the only one in the room who's actually administered this scheme. I used to do it back in the 2003 sort of time, and you would never see an application from somebody with a mental health problem then. The support workers were, it was very common for, on this very small scheme then, for people with visual issues and auditory problems. And that was the predominant nature of the claims. And to judge a support worker now inside of the scheme, particularly to the earlier question about whether there is more guidance we could offer or not, I think externally would be perceived as a change in policy, but also might help you administer the scheme more effectively. So that's as ministers decide on the future shape of access to work, I think that's one of the questions they will need to wrestle with. But you're right, Mr. Betts, it is more tricky to assess support worker needs. I mean, the exact definition for an enabling, which is to be 100% support worker, is that person is instructed on what to do. And in some of the mental health categories, that instruction isn't happening, so a replacement job aid would be more appropriate there. That's limited, and as I said earlier, some of you will be seeing in your postbags whose renewals have changed, and that's the predominant reason.
Well, just a slightly wider question. Is this a wider challenge then in the whole of your systems? You know, the issue of mental health, neurodiversity, claims on that basis. It goes back to discussions we've had with colleagues in other departments about SEND, special needs education. It goes on to NEETs and the applications there for universal credit from people. It goes on even to PIP and the changing balance of applications there over the years. Is this something you're looking at in a wider sense, as opposed to just focusing on mental health and neurodiversity with regard to access to work?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're seeing that across the board. I mean, Bill might want to come in a bit more on this. But, you know, child DLA, young people's PIP, you know, that is much, you know, I think for young people claiming PIP, that's about 80% of that is people with mental health conditions. And it's
89, actually.
It's 89%. And that is something that Alan Milburn is sort of looking at in his wider review on young people. But Bill, do you want to say a little bit about that?
I mean, it's, absolutely, it's a kind of societal phenomena that is very challenging. The Department for Health and Social Care are looking at this, and they're kind of reviewing into prevalence and what's the best approach to support people. Alan Milburn is looking at the issue of NEETs, where that will come up. I'm sure the TIMS review into personal independence payments, a part of that scope, will look at the changing nature of the caseload, and the pressure on the SEND system and the SEND reforms that have just been announced is absolutely key to that. And we are doing our best to ensure that there is kind of joined up thinking between those reviews, and they will be complementary once they're kind of published through this year. I think the Department for Health and Social Care review on prevalence will be quite important about what is actually happening out there, what is driving it, what is the best way to support people, and we'll kind of look to go off the back of that.
Neil, what you said has sort of almost got me having great sympathy with your decision makers. I mean, they're having to make really quite complex decisions, medical decisions. Is there a medical team to whom they can inquire, this person's got this particular condition, what should they really be expected to be able to do? Do you have that sort of medical backup for them?
No, we don't do it like that, but I think you touched on a really important point I was going to try and bring out earlier. This isn't a benefit. It isn't like assessing a benefit. Are you entitled? Are you not? It's very much an assessment, which is why it isn't easy to flood my teams with people to clear it, as I would do, which I have done, for example, with the child DLA backlog that we've, fantastically, when we come to look at the annual report and accounts without Peter next year, I'll be able to show you some really marked improvements.
I'm going to sign off the annual report and accounts before I go. Let me just get that.
But this is much more of an assessment. You need to interrogate the situation. We send people out to visit the employer, to talk to the employer, see what the employer's providing. We assess the workplace, and this is why it does take longer than a standard kind of benefit claim here. And decision makers are asked, said to me, they would like more guidance. But as I said, going to more guidance would be interpreted by many people outside as a change in policy, and we have not changed the policy on access to work. We are trying to use the 5 principles around which to anchor decision making.
There's two different things here, aren't there? I mean, guidance is one thing, but actually being able to make an informed decision on the information you're going to be given, and as an ordinary decision maker, you're not a trained medic. I don't know quite how, with complex medical conditions, how those decision makers make a decision in the absence of medical advice.
Yeah. I inadvertently may have misled you, but they can ask for our own medical team. We've got doctors in the department for advice. That's what I was saying was it's not part of the process. You don't have to pass a medical assessment to get access
I
to
get
work.
the
Sorry, I went the wrong way with your
Answer
question.
my question. We've got that. Thank you. Steve, you're very welcome to this committee.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And thank you for inviting me. I'd like to just understand value for money and how that pans out and what the perception of value for money. And I'd like to particularly look at this through two different lenses. When one looks at the average award for access to work, it's £4,000, and yet there are other government schemes that, when institutes have looked at their value for money, it can cost as much as £25,000 to get people into employment. So how does that value for money work out? The other lens I wanted to look out for value for money was, how do we measure ourselves against other nations where they are much more progressive on getting people into employment? It's 30% difference rates for people who are with a disability and employment in the United Kingdom, whereas that shrinks massively for Denmark and Sweden down to 20% difference. How do we see that value for money of this playing out of the scheme through those two different lenses, please?
Yeah, I mean, I might get Bill to say a little bit more about that, but just sort of some of the headlines. It comes out a bit in the annual report, in the NEA's report, of course, as well. Two kind of headings, really, for value for money. And the NEO say that we haven't done a full value for money test, by which we're referring to a sort of quantitative test. Access to work, we spent 320 million last year supporting 74,000 people, so that was an average of about £7,200 each, I think. The difficulty of, to do a formal value for money test, you basically need to have a control group that would be in a similar situation, but which you would effectively deny access to work to. So you can create a comparison. You can see what effect the access to work support had compared to someone who didn't have access to work. But of course what that means in practice is me identifying people for whom access to work would be appropriate, and I'm saying, for the purpose of my value for money test, I'm going to deny it to you. And the work that we did in 2018 with the NatSen research group indicated there was no real way of doing that in an ethical way, effectively. So that's not something we've been able to do from a quantitative point of view. So we've looked at a qualitative point of view. And it goes back to the heart of what I was saying at the very beginning, Mr. Darling, in the sense that work isn't just about the fiscal. It's not just about the economic. It's not just about the wage per se, though that all matters, of course. Work is something here about value. Work is something about people's self-confidence. It's about a sense of purpose. It's about a sense of feeling that they are part of society and making a contribution, and really giving a sense of well-being as well. And it is important for health as well as the other way around. So one of the things we did in our qualitative research in 2009 and again in 2018, and we're doing further work now, is talk to participants and talk to employers. And participants talked about how access to work creates a level playing field in the workplace, reduces sickness absence, improves confidence and well-being. And that chimes with me when I talk to customers who've really benefited from access to work, and that sense of what it means for them in terms of confidence and well-being from having a job. So that's part of the value story. The other part of the value story is with employers, who talk about how it's enabled them to recruit more disabled people and help them to better understand needs and provide effective support. And actually one of the additional benefits of access to work is it's encouraged employers to look more beyond that at the other aspects of reasonable adjustments that they should be doing anyway, and provide more broader support and encourage them with their work as well. So it goes beyond the numbers in terms of some of the qualitative impacts. And as accounting officer, those are the sorts of things I look at when thinking about the value for money for the scheme. In terms of what other countries do and how we can do more, I mean, I don't know, Bill, do you want to say a bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, across the OECD, there are large disability employment gaps. The UK is broadly middle of the road, but you did mention a couple of countries that have slightly smaller. I think there you need a a kind of government system approach to it. I mean, I'd just say access to work is obviously quite a small scheme in the, if you've got 5 million disabled people in work, and if you want to, close that disability employment gap, access to work is probably not going to be the main lever to do that given the size of the scheme. But I think you need to look at the broader employment support that we offer to people out of work, and the kind of pathways to work rollout that is going on at the moment. We need to look more at what employers can do, and the work that Charlie Mayfield is kind of leading on that, and how we can retain people. There's a whole issue of people kind of coming out of employment and the kind of fit note system, and how we kind of look at that, which I think the government will have more to say on shortly. And then we need to also then look at the role of the benefit system and how that supports people into work at all times, and how enabling that is. And if you look at all of those different factors, then I think you could make movement. I think one thing I would say is that often you see in disability employment kind of measures actually the kind of cultural attitudes to disability, and how many people say in a survey that they are disabled will also move the figures quite a lot. And so historically, where the disability employment gap has closed is when more people have said they are disabled, and we're having a kind of slight reverse of that at the moment.
Yeah, and I just wanted to unpick a little bit further, comparing the effectiveness of spending on access to work compared to other schemes where it might be £25,000 to get somebody into work. What reflection have you given on trying to use, whilst I accept that there is cultural changes and so forth on the bigger picture area, within the department, isn't there an opportunity to say, actually, is this a lever that could have greater impact on getting people with disabilities into work just within the own DWP world?
So as Pete said, we don't have a quantitative analysis of the kind of value for money of the scheme because of the impossibility of getting a counterfactual, but we do know quite a few things. So we know the unit cost of the scheme, which you mentioned was £4,000 for any provision. For people who actually get a grant, the average unit cost is £7,000, and for people who get a support worker, it's £10,500. So we therefore know what would need to be true about the impact of the scheme for it to break even. And it would have to have quite a large impact to break even. So we'd have to have additionality of about 23%, so 23% more people being in work than otherwise would be the case. We know the effectiveness of other DWP labour market programmes, and how, would that be reasonable or feasible compared to other DWP labour market programmes of the last 20 years? And that would put it as requiring to be kind of twice as effective as any DWP labour market programme to kind of break even on that basis. And then we also know the employment history of people on access to work. So we've tracked their previous employment data. People applying to access to work have a very strong employment history compared to other DWP employment programmes. Over 80% have been in full-time employment for the previous 6 years. And so will you get that additionality? And then we also know that over half of the people applying for access to work are employed by a large employer, mainly in the public sector, but also in the private sector. So the extent to which the employer would provide that adjustment or not is in question. And then you triangulate that with a very strong qualitative analysis we have about how effective people perceive the scheme to be in retaining being in work. I think it would point to probably it's quite unlikely that the scheme pays for itself fiscally, but we don't know that for certain. But that is not unusual when we're talking about schemes that support disabled people. But there is, a large societal benefit to it, and that is, and that's why we run the scheme, because there is that need there to provide these above reasonable adjustments, and it's a good thing that the state provides that support.
It just gives you a sense of the work that's been done. But as I say, from an accounting officer point of view, it's over and above the fiscal, over and above the economic. It's about the societal benefit and the benefit to the individual, and that is the thing I think that makes it appropriate to do, and to do it at the scale we're currently doing it at.
And that's been true since 1994. I mean, when I looked at it, as I said, when I used to administer it, my first look was crikey, some of this is rather expensive, but then when you saw the lives that this was changing and the impact it was having for the individuals, I think then you could justify the scheme, and I think you can justify the scheme now.
Eve, have you want to come back?
The other area I wanted to explore was managing budgets. Thank you, Chair. So I just really wanted to understand where you were managing this budget from, because clearly it's a grant budget, and so unpicking that, how you were managing that as far as finding other monies to assist with that, but also I wanted to understand, I understand that there's some schemes that are annual managed expenditure, whereas this is a grant pot, and clearly there's a lot of benefits that are annual managed expenditure. Can you explain why this is a grant pot and not an annual managed expenditure? Because you're talking about, and a number of you said, it has a significant societal positive impact. So why is it managed from a purely grant pot rather than as other areas where we would say that those benefits have a societal positive impact? Why not the annual? Why not that approach? I'd welcome some reflections around that area, as well as how you're filling the gaps that this by having the grant is filling in for.
Yeah, so as you say, it's a grant scheme, and grant schemes sit in our departmental expenditure limit, whereas benefit expenditure fits in our annually managed expenditure. It's the nature of the scheme that makes it a grant scheme. Obviously, the scheme could be policy change. The government could decide to change the policy and change it into a benefit entitlement, in which case the government might decide to put it in AMI, but we're working within the parameters of the policy, which is to treat it as a grant scheme and to treat it in the way that I do in Dell. That then means, exactly as you say, Mr. Darling, I've then got a budget for it, effectively. We touched on this a little bit earlier, didn't we? But it does mean that I need to make a forecast each year for the number of claims that are likely to come in and be successful, and the grants that we'd be paying out as a result. And make provision not only for within the departmental expenditure limit for the running costs of the scheme, that's the number of people I'm hiring to run it, but also, and the colleagues working on it, but also the spend of the grants. They all come under the Dell, and I need to budget for them each year. And each year I budgeted, often a bit more than the year before, but those are conversations we have in the context of the spending review with the Treasury as one line in an overall conversation about our overall departmental expenditure limit.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much. Anna, please.
Yeah, just a very quick follow-up on this point, which I think Steve was really excellent in saying, would it not be possible to come up with sort of some relative cost-benefit analysis of how value for money this is relative to other schemes that might be trying to close the disability gap? And indeed, as we reform PIP, where that personal independence payment is used by people to get to work and so on. And whilst as a former chief analyst, I'm delighted to hear that you would aim for the most robust case-controlled study. Shy of that being available, have you not at least done some sort of modelling which would show if access to work were not available to these individuals? One assumes that they would not be in work. That is from when I get constituents approaching me who've applied and had access to work refused, it effectively means that they are not able to work. So if the counter is not working, i.e. they're on benefits, they're not paying taxes, and the detriment to their health and potentially additional care, have you not been able to model? Because I think it would be beneficial. I think it probably would be very good value for money. So I don't think we're questioning that this is poor value for money. If anything, it would be demonstrating that it's very good value for money and effectively giving you the ammunition to argue for bigger budgets.
Yeah, so I'll say two things. One is we asked ourselves exactly that question, which is why we got NatSen in to look at what we could do, and they came up with the conclusion I've described. The modelling we've done is the modelling that Bill has gone through in a bit of detail earlier in answer to Mr. Darling's question, which would show, I think you said, an additionality requirement of 23 percentage points, which is a lot compared to other employment schemes, actually. So it would need to be much more successful than other employment schemes to be value for money. In that, just purely from a fiscal perspective, right, before we get onto a societal perspective. But I mean, the broader point is it plays a role in a much wider set of schemes, and I think it does its job in terms of what it's all about. It's all about levelling the playing field. That's the point of it. And you've got to look at it alongside what employers are doing, but other different types of support, employment support, where you know something like Connect to Work that we've now fully rolled out across the whole of England and Wales. Connect to Work is providing employment support to people to help them get a job and to stay in work, and that complements access to work, which is helping them to manage the disability in the context of the adjustments that need to make to level the playing field for them in the workplace. So there's a whole, I mean, for many customers, you can imagine a whole suite of different things coming together to help them make that journey from out of work and into work, and this is only one of them.
I mean,
do you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, I can't see how the counterfactual could be 0% would be in employment. I don't think that is. Well, no employment programme would ever assume that. The NAO.
It's the 23% is the addition.
Yeah, but to say that 0% would be in work when 80% have had a work history of full-time employment for 6 years. 50% are with a large employer. As the NAO report says in para 116, the review of 200 cases, it was felt that 40% should be funded by the employer. So I can't see how the counterfactual would be that low. We know that most people aren't applying for a new job when they go to Access to Work. 90% are already in employment. We've done some qualitative research on why do people apply for Access to Work. There are kind of 3 reasons for that. One is they've had a health condition or impairment get worse. Second is they're kind of changing role within their current employer or a new role. But the third is actually they just found out about the scheme. And the employer's like, okay, I can get some funding here. So that's where I don't think that would be a kind of reasonable counterfactual. And that is other studies that have attempted to do this in the early 2000s. They used a similar approach to what you suggested, but we just don't think that's robust.
So sorry, just to clarify, Chair, what is your robust modelling? This you keep talking about this 23%. What is that?
That is a analysis of what would need to be true for the scheme to break even, based on the unit cost of the scheme, and how that compares to other labour market programmes over the last 20 years that DWP have done. The 2 schemes with the largest additionality were the Future Jobs Fund scheme and Work Choice, that are around 11%.
Well, we could go on discussing this all morning. I think, Anna, what we'll do is look at the evidence, and that we may well come back to you, if we may, Sir Peter, on this whole aspect. Clive Betts, please.
Yes, just coming back and trying to put it in the wider context which we explored before. The scheme's been around for a long time. It hasn't fundamentally changed, though perhaps the demands on it have. Now, we've had the Green Paper, which was published in March 25, looking at proposals to reform incapacity and disability benefits. You've then had the Mayfield report as well. There's been a government response to the Green Paper. So what's your thinking now about how you're going to pull that together? Is it going to be a significant change in the Access to Work scheme? Will it fit into a significant change in the wider benefit scheme, trying to encourage more people back to work? What's your thinking at this stage?
You're getting into areas of policy, of course, Mr. Betts, which are issues for the government. But let me tell you about some of the things that are going on to help to pull that together, which then the government will then take a view on. And I think Charlie Mayfield's report is really important for that, because what that is trying to do now is get a body of evidence about what is going on in the amongst employers and what good looks like. And this alongside the effectiveness of things like Workwell and other and Connect to Work and other interventions helps us to understand the nature of what needs to be done when you bring together the role of government. Within government, you've got employment support and skill support on the one hand and benefit expenditure on the other. The role of employers, and then the role particularly of the health system and health professionals. And for example, we heard this morning about, I think there was a BBC report I listened to as I was coming in this morning that suggested that many GPs were just simply waving through fit notes when they related to mental health. And the key thing, I think, for any government response needs to look at the full partnership across each of those systems, because they all need to come together into a way that helps people stay in work, get into work, stay in work, and succeed in work. And these are all the different elements. So I can go through each of those in turn, but the main point to say is, I mean, it's obviously for the government to decide what to do in terms of how to take the policy agenda forward, but it's got to be seen in the context, not of just trying to fix one bit of one part of the system, but what is the role of the health system, employers and government operating together, because all of those together impact on people's lives.
I think you're going to answer the question I was going to follow up with, not on, obviously, you don't do policy, Mr. Peter. Maybe you'll be invited back to do it at some point when you retire, but at this stage you're not doing it. But in order to inform a government's policy, what are the key issues you think need addressing in terms of the concerns you've got about how the system is currently working?
Yeah, I think I would say one is, what are the interventions that are most effective? And I think the thing that has not been explored until Charlie's work has been the interventions in employers, because they have the resources and they have the contact with people day in, day out, who before the health condition develops into a way in which they fall out of work and need medical support and need support from the benefit system. What is the role of employers? So first thing is the work of the vanguards. So as I say, 100 employers developing things like workplace health provision and other types of intervention. What comes out of that in terms of, and should government do more to incentivise that, to encourage it, to mandate it? These are all questions, I guess, that would need to be resolved following that work. The second thing is around the way that the systems work across health as well as employment. So something like, just to give you two examples of what we're doing with the health system. One would be the fact that we have disability employment advisors going into many GP surgeries. So these are DWP staff who go into a GP surgery, and I've seen this in places like Leeds and Ilford and in Poplar, where they go to see the GP to talk about having a fit note. And as part of the conversation with the medical professional, they can say, look, actually, we think work could be a help for you. Can I refer you on? It's a voluntary thing, but can I refer you on to this colleague in the same building who can talk to you about work and support? And so that's already happening, but we have a new pathway called Workwell, which is putting money from DWP into the health system to develop those referral routes into pathways of employment support. And the Secretary of State recently announced a further expansion of Workwell to do just that. So that would be the second element. And then the third element is, how does the benefit system work to encourage and incentivise work, and how does it encourage people to be having a conversation about what they can do rather than what they can't do? And of course, Stephen Tim's review will play into that effectively, and I think Alan Milburn's review will probably get into the same space as well, although that goes on a broader focus on young people. So you can see these different elements are all happening all at the same time. They will come together, I imagine, in around the autumn or later on in the year, and that will give an evidence base for policymakers, I think, to make decisions.
That's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Peter.
Thank you very much, Clive. Amanda, please.
Thank you. And it actually his question moves smoothly on from Clive's question, really, is understanding all the changes that are coming forward and all the reviews, and we're undertaking an inquiry on supporting disabled people into employment at this moment. Is how do you envisage the access to work scheme to fit in that new changing environment? How do you see the role changing going forward?
Yeah, I think it's developing what we've been discussing already this morning, to be honest, Ms. Hack. So I think it's thinking about how does the world of adjustments need to fit into a wider type of support. So I think I would particularly look at the workplace, because this is where access to work operates, and the work of employers and the work of reasonable adjustments alongside that. So if you look at in the workplace situation, where does workplace health provision sit, and many employers offer support, workplace support, health support in the workplace to help someone, if they develop a health condition, get to see a practitioner quickly and to get that addressed more quickly than having to wait to go and see a GP or go into the NHS system. So where is best practice on that working through? What about helping to prevent illness in the first place? What about what can be done in terms of prevention in the workplace? So many employers will have, obviously many do flu jabs and such like, but how do you develop that support onwards in terms of things like access to blood pressure monitoring and other types of mental health support that might be available for someone when they've got a low-level mental health issue, to address that sooner alongside that. And reasonable adjustments, I think, are part of that whole story. And where access to work fits in is you start with the employer and what the employer should do. And I think raising the expectations of what employers should do is where Charlie's challenge comes through. And then access to work is those adjustments that are necessary, but it would not be reasonable for the employer to do. And of course, that varies according to the nature of the employer. We talked earlier about large companies where they come to access to work for an ergonomic chair. But you can also imagine a very small business for whom some of the adjustments that a big company could easily afford, they're not affordable, and so it would be reasonable for access to work to come in and provide that type of support. So I see access to work topping up, but I would say you've got to start with what else is going on in the workplace, and in particular the role of employers to do what they need to do. Because it makes sense, it's win, and when you talk to enlightened employers about this, it's win-win. You can keep talented people in the workplace, you can bring new talented people in just by making small adjustments. And I still have in my mind a very poor situation when a number of years ago I was visiting this firm in Bristol, where the firm had been set up by a group of parents of children with Down syndrome. And their thing was, what's going to happen to our children once they leave the education system? What's the employment prospects for them? And they created a business making flatbreads. Quite wonderful flatbreads, I have to say, although I'm gluten intolerant, so I couldn't really eat many of them. But they were one, and the young people had a sort of period of time working there to demonstrate their employability, and then the parents then went to other big firms, some of which said they were disability confident, and said, "Can you take these people on?" I remember one story of a big firm, I won't say who they were, who said, "Well, our shifts are 8-hour shifts." And the parents said, well, these young people have proved that they can work, but the nature of their condition means that they could really only do 4-hour shifts. Can you split your 8-hour shifts into 2 4-hour shifts? And they said no. They said no. And it's heartbreaking. So I think there is much more that employers need to do in many cases to raise up to the standard of the best. And access to work fits on top of that, to do the things that are unreasonable to ask an employer to do. Does that help to answer the question?
Yeah. Yes. You finished?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
I've just got one or two rounding up questions, listening to what we've heard this morning. And the more I've listened, the more I feel sorry for your decision makers, because this is a very complicated scheme. Yeah. And you're going to help by giving them better training or training new ones and better IT systems and so on and so forth. But you're about to do some reforms on this programme from the Green Paper. So first question, what is the timing of that? When are we likely to see what the new shape of this grant is likely to be?
Want to address that, Bill?
So we had some collaboration committees last year run from July to October to help us develop our proposals. Ministers would like us to continue that work with the independent disability advisory panel that Zara Todd chairs, that has just kind of formed at the end of last year, the start of this year. So that's the first major programme that they're going to support the department on, and we'll be working with them over the next 3 to 4 months. So I imagine, depending on what ministers want to do, it will be later in the year, second half of the year, that we'll be able to set out any changes that we want to make to the scheme. I would say that we've heard loud and clear that we need to retain the scheme as a flexible and personal support to people that is, focused on that individual person's needs. So that will still be a a central part of any reforms.
I suppose, just to be clear, we don't want people out there worrying.
No.
Any reforms, the basic scheme will still remain. It's to make it clearer. And I suppose what we want to do is to, bearing in mind the words in in the summary page, paragraph 9, page 8, awards are not always aligned with the policy intent, and funding decisions have been inconsistent. And they go on. Examples include the following: reasonable adjustment fundament to support workers. But what we want to do is to try and help your decision makers, and indeed all of those that are applying for the grant. What is this clearly supposed to achieve? Is that where we're all trying to get to?
Yeah, I think that's a fair summation of what ministers are trying to do.
And I was with some decision makers last week up in Halifax, and I said, what's the one thing I can try and get across for you? And your response, Chair, suggests I've been successful, because that was the point. They would like you to understand just how difficult this is.
On that note of agreement, can I thank you all very much. Sir Peter, can I thank you particularly and wish you well for the future. I was mulling it over in my mind when you said you were going to sign off the accounts, whether we might not have you back from whatever you're doing next to answer for your policies in those accounts, the policies and results in those accounts. But that's for another day. But whatever
happens. At your disposal.
Well, that's very kind.
A kind retirement gift.
But whatever happens, can we end this hearing on a huge thank you to you and, of course, the other witnesses, and wish you very well in whatever you're going to go on to do in the future.
So much. Really appreciate it.
The uncorrected version of the transcript will be available in the coming days, following which we will produce a report with recommendations, which we hope you, Sir Peter, and your assistants will look at carefully and see whether you can agree with our recommendations. But for now,